Welcome, exile, to Wraeclast. Wraeclast is a brutal land with a brutal history. From the first moments Path of Exile is opened, the player is faced with the enormity of what a sentence of exile carries with it. The land is feral, tainted. The dead walk, and they hunger. What you may have done to earn this mortal punishment is almost unimportant when faced with the reality of being stripped of all protections and thrust into this world to die. But who even are you? Why were you sent to this hellhole? And most importantly, why would you even stop to find out when you've got divine orbs to grind? Well, that's where I come in. While you give yourself carpal tunnel in order to shave those precious seconds off of your 10,000th tier 16 map clear, let me talk you through the history, inhabitants, and stories found in this world. My name is Tanis Fugit. This is me. Yes, I'm a VTuber, although that will be largely irrelevant to this video or any other video in this series. I only mention it here because you may see my handsome mug pop up from time to time in the background footage on screen. Some of my B-roll footage will have come from personal recording sessions, but some will have come from my Twitch stream, meaning that some amount of time, this face will be there. Since YouTube audiences are much like wild animals and can be spooked easily, I wanted to explain this up front. The first thing you need to understand about Wraeclast is the land's relationship with gods and divinity. In time immemorial, regular people could, through great acts and/or the adoration of their peers, achieve apotheosis, becoming a god and gaining immortality. Two of these gods are innocence and sin, born as brothers. It's important to understand that despite the names, these two do not represent good and evil, but rather something more akin to law and chaos, like in the Dungeons & Dragons alignment chart. Innocence was incredibly well behaved, but Sin was not, and often did as he liked instead of following their mother's orders. As punishment, their mother would withhold food from Sin and lavish great praise on Innocence. One day, hungry and weak, Sin stole a fish. His brother would surely tell his mother, which would mean even more missed meals, and so Sin attacked Innocence, beating him until he agreed not to tell their mother. But that went against Innocence's very nature, and soon he told their mother what had happened. For the combined crimes of theft, battery, and lying to cover it all up, it was decided that Sin was irredeemable, and he was burned. As his body disintegrated to the flames, he attained apotheosis as the smoke and ash from his body filtered into the crowd that was watching. As his body entered them, the people became an extension of Sin himself. They turned on each other, slaughtering and burning the entire village. As had happened before, however, Sin now existed in that ash and smoke, which now drifted over the countryside. His brother, Innocence, swore that he would bring purifying flames to cleanse any and all places the traces of his brother would fall. He would become the first High Templar, the first of a tradition that would continue without end in this war-torn land. Eventually, Innocence would achieve his own apotheosis, gaining the loyalty and admiration of his people by inspiring violent zealotry and hatred in them. The cycle of violence and retribution begot by these two may have simply ended here. However, Innocence was so constrained by his sheer devotion to codes and oaths he found it impossible to inspire faith on his own. The only way he could rally the people behind his crusade against his brother was to continue to solicit fear and hatred in them. For his own part, Sin was so aware of the power these gods had over their mortal followers that he sought to free humanity from their grasp. He delved deep into the tall mountain ranges of Wraeclast, and there he created a dark beast. The beast would keep these gods in check, forcing them to slumber forever, so long as the beast should live. An unintended consequence of this is that mortals would gain the power of thaumaturgy, or magic. The beast is in fact the source of all thaumaturgy in the world. And I'm sure giving this godly power of thaumaturgy to the masses of unchecked mortals won't be a problem. Right? Let's talk about the races of man on Wraeclast. First up are the Vaal, the oldest known civilization to call this continent home. For the purposes of our story, the Vaal are primarily important for two reasons. One is their use of and obsession over virtue gems, and the other is the actions of their last queen, Atziri. Virtue gems are the same gems that allow our player character to use their abilities. These gems are plentiful and powerful, and tapping into their full potential has been an obsession of a number of mortals throughout time. It is unknown whether the Vaal created the gems or if they already existed and were simply found and used by the Vaal. Experiments designed to gain insight into and exploit the power of these gems is a constant theme throughout the story of the game and its world. As mentioned, Atziri was the name of the last queen of the Vaal Empire. She was a violent despot, using the existing Vaal tradition of human sacrifice to kill and silence any who would dare speak out against her. She was vain and obsessed with her own legacy and mortality. At one point, information about a famous Vaal serial killer reached Atziri. The man was supposedly 168 years old, though he had the body of a man no older than 20. This made her believe the man had discovered some secret to eternal youth for which he needed to slay his victims. Driven by such a possibility, she instructed the most powerful thaumaturgist under her control, a man named Doriani, to experiment on their populace. Atziri sent an uncounted number of men and women to Doriani to be experimented on and killed in an attempt to attain immortality. Somewhere along the line, this experimentation led to a mysterious event called the Communion. The details of this fateful event are lost to history, but Atziri, Doriani, and a large percentage of the Vaal peoples died all at once, bringing a sudden and mysterious end to their civilization. By this time, there were a small number of other races existing on the continent of Wraeclast, and the surviving Vaal were assimilated into their nearest neighboring civilization, the Osmeri. The Osmeri hailed from the high mountains around and above the Vaal lands. The Vaal had helped them advance as a civilization, and once the Vaal had disappeared, the Osmeri came down from the mountains to establish themselves in the areas previously held by their neighbor. Their leader, Tarkus Veruso, had watched the Vaal leadership fall to the corruption of the virtue gems and thaumaturgy. As such, he forbade any practice or study of the art and ordered all virtue gems to be collected, taken to the mountain city of Highgate, and buried deep in the bowels of the mountains. With these acts, the current Eternal Empire was forged, and the great city of Sarn would be its capital. Other races of note on the continent were the Ezamites, the Karui, and the Maraketh. Little is told to us about any of these people apart from how they interacted with the Eternal Empire. All three were often taken as slaves by the Empire during its early days. It was not long until the Empire had its first challenge. 5 years after the first Emperor died, his successor was killed. In fact, he was completely dismembered by something only ever referred to as a dark being. Large parts of the new empire fell into permanent darkness until the great general Alano Frisia battled back the darkness. The official borders of the fledgling empire were established, and without a clear successor to the throne, Frisia was named emperor. What followed was an era of peace and prosperity for the empire, as the Frisia family passed the title of emperor down generation after generation. The purity of the family tree was guaranteed through processes of inbreeding, eventually yielding a sterile emperor. Izaro was a mad, twisted man, but the fact that he would have a succession crisis on his hands did not escape him. He spent much time deciding how to handle the situation before stumbling on an ancient rite of ascendancy from the old Osmeri civilization. Izaro decided then and there that a labyrinth would be built, and any who sought the crown would first need to complete the trials found within. The first to conquer this test would immediately be named emperor. A son of the Perandus family known as Chittus heard of this, and immediately knew he must be the one to complete the labyrinth. After all, Izaro was mad and frail, and there was no way a commoner could be allowed to rule simply because they managed to stumble through some trials by blind luck. The Perandus family were wealthy and powerful merchants, so the empire would be best suited if it were headed by one of their blood. Chittus proceeded to use his wealth and influence to buy himself every possible advantage, and preemptively murder any likely challengers or would-be political opponents. Chittus was successful in the labyrinth and became the first Perandus emperor. Through the ages, the initial banning of thaumaturgy fell away. Magic was studied by the emperors and their hired thaumaturgists. Virtue gems became seen as divine by the emperors, and thaumaturgists often experimented with augmenting humans with their power. These experiments were torturous and inhumane. The lucky victims died quickly, most suffered, and some were permanently corrupted, twisted into deformed monsters which even today roam throughout Wraeclast. One key result of this research, however, came when Chittus's own personal thaumaturgist, a young man known as Malachi, successfully surgically implanted virtue gems into test subjects. The resulting life forms became known as gemlings, and completing this process on a number of Chittus's personal guard created his famed Gemling Legion. Malachi was given plenty of slaves and prisoners to perfect his techniques on, and soon was able to create his most famous work. You see, Emperor Chittus took many concubines and lovers, using them for his own amusement before boredom took him. One of these women was named Diala, supposedly a favorite of Chittus, but one that asked far too many questions. Eventually, she was handed over to Malachi personally. Diala became a victim of Stockholm Syndrome and fell madly in love with her captor, even as he experimented brutally on her. From her, Malachi created the great Gemling Queen. She believed herself to be his most perfect creation and imagined she would rule by his side for all eternity. Sadly, Malachi had little personal interest in her, besides her usefulness as a tool. But we'll get back to them later. As the Emperor, his court, and his thaumaturgists lived lavish lifestyles, the people they were despotically ruling over were growing discontent. Thaumaturgy was still seen as heresy to most, a gluttonous indulgence that was corrupting the leadership of their great empire. So thorough was the general distaste for Chittus's rule that High Templar Vaal found no difficulty in assembling a group of people to enact a rebellion. While the Purity Rebellion, as it is called, would involve a veritable who's who of powerful people of the Empire, we will focus mostly on Vaal himself and the great poet Victario. The general strategy of Vaal when preparing for the Purity Rebellion was to rouse the Empire's enemies. Specifically, this meant securing aid from the leaders of the neighboring people that the Empire had been capturing and enslaving. The Azamites were ruled at the time by King Scoth, himself a despotic autocrat. Vaal sent the poet Victario into Ezimir to befriend Thane Rigwald, one of Scoth's vassals. Victario was successful in stirring Rigwald's romantic warrior soul, causing Rigwald to kill his own king and lead his people into battle against Chittus when the time came. At the same time, King Kaum of the Karui and Sakema Deshret of the Meraketh each engaged the armies of the Emperor. Eventually, the armies of the rebellion closed in on the capital city of Sarn and laid siege. Chittus and his powerful Gemling Legion were prepared to defend the city when Sarn's Lord Mayor Ondar, working with the rebellion, successfully assassinated Chittus using a poisoned blade. Additionally, much of the populace inside the city were in active revolt, called to action by Victario's impassioned words and poems. Between the revolt, siege, and the death of the Emperor, the Gemling Legion fell, and Vaal was named Emperor. As is the story of the Eternal Empire, however, one bad ruler gave way to another. Vaal proved to be a terrible ruler. He was hell-bent on restoring the Empire to its lost former glory, but single-minded in his approach. As his empire fell apart around him, Vaal worked to remove all traces of thaumaturgy from Wraeclast, including the virtue gems. He had all of Chittus's thaumaturgists killed, except one. Malachi managed to convince Vaal that he and his powerful gemling queen Diala could create a device capable of destroying all of the virtue gems. Vaal allowed Malachi to work, and soon a new device was unveiled, known as the Rapture device. This tool would not, however, destroy the gems as advertised. In fact, Malachi had learned of the existence of the beast and knew where it lay dormant. He intended to use the Rapture device to cut a hole into the impenetrable hide of the beast, through which he would enter and take control of the creature. Diala herself was intended to be used as fuel to power the device, but at the last minute she refused, unwilling to die even if it was for her beloved Malachi. Without her, the device failed to fully pierce the hide of the creature. However, Malachi was still able to enter the beast. Once inside its hide, Malachi joined with the beast, the two becoming one twisted entity. Malachi's joining and awakening of the beast sparked an event known as the Cataclysm. The people of Wraeclast were corrupted by the beast and turned on each other. Violence broke out, cascading through the entirety of the Empire. Even the Karui war host, who had taken the southern shores of the continent for themselves after participating in the Purity Rebellion, eventually fell to corruption, with Kaum himself felling the last of his own warriors. Only 500 Karui families made it off of mainland Wraeclast to their island nation of Gamakanui. In the aftermath of the Cataclysm, most of the inhabitants of the Empire were dead, and the land was a cursed, inhospitable place. The dead refused to stay down, rising as zombies and skeletons and spirits. Native wildlife mutated and became deadly and feral. Decades worth of people, their bodies broken from thaumaturgic experimentation, broke free to wander the lands and feed mindlessly. The Empire, once spanning most of the continent, was reduced to a single small island known as Oriath. The city of Theopolis on this island became the new imperial capital. Oh yeah, and Malachi, within the beast, still lives and is slumbering. The mines in which the beast is located were sealed by Deshret, locking the nightmare inside for now, while the Kafka-esque thaumaturgist plots and plans for another, bigger cataclysm. It is into this world, in the city of Theopolis, where your character is born, raised, and eventually imprisoned. At the beginning of the game, the ruler of the Empire is High Templar Dominus, another in a long line of corrupt, evil men to hold that position. He has recently become very interested in the history of the Empire as it pertains to the mainland, and has set up a base in the destroyed city of Sarn. Along with many of his blackguards, the vicious General Gravitius, and a power-hungry young thaumaturgist named Piety, Dominus is recreating history. Once again, the call to perfect human specimens by fusing them with virtue gems is being studied, and once again, hapless victims are being tortured and experimented on. This time, slaves are not quite enough, and so the Templars have been tasked with setting outrageous new laws. The Church has begun launching inquisitions into just about every facet of most people's lives, and anyone thought to be guilty of any crime, almost no matter how small, faces exile. Once sentenced, an exile is placed on a ship and dumped just off the southern shore of the mainland, likely to die. Those that survive are collected into experimentation. They say that while history does not repeat itself, it sure does rhyme. Through the history of Wraeclast, we see the same story being played out over and over again. A despotic ruler is obsessed with human experimentation in order to try and achieve divinity or some form of immortality. This results in their death and the collapse of their rule, at which time a power vacuum is filled by another despotic ruler. Rinse and repeat. Can you, nearly naked, unequipped, and locked up on a ship for the mainland, do anything at all to end this cycle of violence? And even if you can, what kind of fallout might occur? Thank you for watching this video. If you like what I'm doing here and you want to see more of this kind of thing, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You know, all that YouTube stuff that I hate saying, but it really does help out. So have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.